Joining me live this Sunday morning is the New South Wales Opposition Leader, Chris Minns. Chris Minns, thank you very much for your time. Let's turn to the central question here around these Trade Commissioner posts, around the Barilaro matter. You've said you're going to scrap them altogether. Are you risking throwing the baby out with the bathwater here?
No, I don't think so. These positions were only created in the last few years, Kieran. They hadn't existed in New South Wales for a long period of time. We've had a trade presence in those capitals and those major export markets around the world. But the previous positions were actually axed by John Fay in 1993, and he said it was a throwback to a colonial age. Kieran, we actually agree with him. We think the money could be better spent driving export opportunities for New South Wales. But these guys get paid more than the New South Wales Premier, and I think trade around the world is more complicated and complex than the New South Wales government's giving them credit.
Foreign trade and investment accounts for 20% support of the New South Wales workforce. That's the argument the Premier makes. Who will you have then representing your state up against other states? Because it is a competitive process, isn't it, to attract investment?
Yeah, there's a couple of points here. Firstly, the Consul General in New York at the moment is Nick Greiner, the former Premier of New South Wales. There's no suggestion that he's in some way dudding New South Wales in his responsibilities to the country. Second point here is I think trade and investment is more about expertise and knowledge rather than slapping people on the back or shaking hands. It's a $93 billion a year export market. Our biggest exports in terms of goods are commodities, whether it's coal or gold or aluminium or petroleum. So we really need a more rigorous and complex association with our major trading partners. And I think the New South Wales government's got this old-style, quite naive approach to export markets with someone with a business card saying senior trade envoy. I think the modern economy is more complicated than that.
The Premier reportedly offered one of his ministers another trade-focused role. This is according to the Nine newspapers today. The Premier responded in a statement. His office said, whoever the Premier considers appointing to his ministry is a matter for the Premier alone. That's true, isn't it? If it's a ministerial appointment, it's the Premier's call.
Yeah, he's been a little bit artful there with his statement. He's talking about ministerial jobs, which are certainly within his remit, and he can appoint whoever he likes to those jobs. The article in the newspaper was in fact about a position in London as the Agent General. Now, the truth of the matter is they're public service appointments. If the Premier were to intervene in that process, it would be exactly the same as we've seen with the Barilaro appointment in New York. These are serious allegations, and I've always found Mr Perrottet, notwithstanding our differences, to be pretty upfront. I think he needs to front the media today and explain what's going on and at least issue a firm denial if it's true or not.
From my read of that story, there were two jobs. One was a parliamentary secretary trade role, the other the Agent General role, and I don't think there was a suggestion that he actually offered that to Mr Elliott, the Agent General role, that it was simply mentioned to him. I guess you want clarity one way or the other. That's your point.
Absolutely. I mean, the second position, the trade role, the Agent General role in London is a public service position. We've had that over the last 8 weeks. It's resulted in the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party resigning, the Public Service Commissioner believing that she'd been misled, Mr Barilaro himself withdrawing from the position. And at least as far as today's newspaper is concerned, we might be back into this cycle again. We need some clarity from the New South Wales Premier. The bottom line here, Kieran, is these are not party bags or lolly bags to be distributed by the New South Wales Liberal Party. These are taxpayer-funded positions. They pay over $500,000 a year. In many cases, their expense allowance is $100,000, which is more than a nurse earns in New South Wales. So the very least the taxpayers of this state are owed is an explanation today.
In the broader story here, though, the Premier clearly believed it was a process that was at arm's length from one of his ministers. When it was proven or suggested in this interim report that's been looking at this that it might be not the case, he saw that minister step down. So to this point, from what we know, the Premier has acted appropriately, hasn't he?
Kieran, I think there's been a deliberate attempt by the New South Wales government to obstruct any kind of scrutiny in relation to the New York appointment. That's the Barilaro appointment. We were told that it was independent of government, that it was a meritorious selection, that it was complete transparency. None of those things have proven to be correct. In the last 2 weeks, we've had the Public Service Commissioner herself say that she felt that she'd been misled by the process. We've had Mr Barilaro withdraw from the position. We've had Minister Ayres resign completely from the New South Wales Cabinet. I think the point here is that we were told that this was a Public Service Commission appointment. It seems as though ministerial interference is happened right the way through it, and this is a problem because we were told something by the New South Wales government that didn't prove to be correct. I think the public would have been furious about a jobs for the mates type scenario, but they're absolutely incandescent to believe that they're being treated for mugs, and I think they have been over the last 2 months.
The Saturday Daily Telegraph yesterday reporting that the Building Commissioner, David Chandler, had stood down off the back of a problematic relationship with a Liberal minister. Was that the real reason that that minister was dumped last week, in your view?
Yeah, it's very difficult to discern. You'll note that there's been 2 resignations, one in relation to Minister Ayres, one in relation to Minister Perrottet in the last 7 days, and the circumstances surrounding both of them haven't been revealed to the public, the opposition, to the media. I think that's very problematic in terms of public administration in New South Wales. David Chandler was working very hard on behalf of the people of New South Wales as the Building Commissioner. The circumstances surrounding his resignation from that role shocked the industry, and we still don't have clarity in relation to why he left in the first place. So I think the best way of short-circuiting this and making sure we don't have another 2 months' worth of inquiries is for the New South Wales Premier to release the resignation letter so the taxpayers of this state can understand the circumstances in which he left.
Let's turn our attention now to another story. You've been paying a visit to emergency departments over recent months. Let's have a look at one video that you posted online.
It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I am at Blacktown Emergency Department. I've just spoken to some of the nurses and the health workers, security guards here in the middle of the night. You can see it's still a lot of people in the waiting room, even though it's 2 a.m.
Now, Chris Minns, you've received a letter from one of the departments saying that you should stop these emergency department visits. Will you cease?
Look, I won't. I mean, the reason for those visits is that I was encouraged to go there by nurses in particular in Western Sydney in the middle of the night to understand what the conditions were in which they work. I briefly drop into them, Kieran, often in the middle of the night. If there's no one at the triage desk, I go and thank the nurse for the work that he or she is doing on behalf of New South Wales and see firsthand how many people are waiting for treatment. We know 55,000 people in 1 quarter turned up to an emergency room and turned around and left before seeking or receiving any treatment because the wait time was too long. That's the biggest figure we've ever had in New South Wales. So there's clearly a crisis at the moment in terms of our health system. It's a complicated issue and the problems are not easy. The solutions, I should say, are not easy, but sticking our head in the sand and refusing to even look at it isn't a solution at all.
I saw you also released a letter that you were sent, and it said to you that visits must be properly managed so as to not disrupt normal activities. Have any of your visits disrupted the normal procedures in the ED?
Yeah, look, I refuse to believe that turning up to an ED, quickly checking out how many people are waiting, and if there's no one at the counter, thanking the nurse for their service is disruption or a breach of protocol. And I think really it's the obligation of every member of parliament to see for themselves how services are actually being delivered, whether it's in their own electorate or in other parts of New South Wales. I would have thought that it's in fact core business for the Leader of the Opposition as well.
I've got a major story off the back of the floods. Resilience New South Wales to be scaled down dramatically according to a report to government yet to be released fully. And Shane Fitzsimmons, the head of Resilience New South Wales, to be sacked as well. What's your read on this agency? Has it played a positive role or is it central to the delays around the flood response?
Look, I do have to admit the evidence from our members of parliament and those on the grounds in flood-affected communities is that Resilience New South Wales is a big bureaucracy, but it's been dumped on top of our existing emergency services agencies, and it's not working. We can't have a big, giant bureaucracy that's taking over $1 billion in annual budget, taking resources away from other combat agencies. When you've got an emergency, a natural emergency in particular, you need someone in charge making quick decisions and deploying resources in a really short period of time. The evidence out of the Lismore and Northern Rivers floods is that there was some chaos and confusion, and Kieran, you can't afford that when we have natural disasters, of which we're going to have more, unfortunately, no doubt, in the coming years.
Information that I've been given from those familiar with the way Resilience New South Wales operates is that the problem is this command and control approach to humanitarian crises. And the point that was put to me is you need humanitarian-minded people leading the recovery. It needs a genuinely local, community-centred partnership, not a Sydney or top-down approach. Is that the sort of thing that you will bring to government if you win?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we need to listen to the local communities who've been affected by natural disasters and learn the lessons from what they've gone through. The circumstances in New South Wales at the moment is that Resilience New South Wales had been created in the last few years. It's a giant bureaucracy that sits alongside or on top of the SES, the Rural Fire Service and the New South Wales Police, and there's confusion as to who's responsible for what role. Ironically enough, the model that works well is the RFS Commissioner that Shane Fitzsimmons was the former commissioner of, someone who's got single authority, who can make decisions quickly and is responsible for the decisions being made. Look, the evidence out of the Northern Rivers is that this situation isn't working, but it's been 4 days since there's been media leaks about the future of Resilience New South Wales. I think for fairness, as well as some certainty in emergency management, the Premier should state his intentions in relation to that agency so that we can get on and prepare for the next natural disaster in New South Wales.
Do you think Shane Fitzsimmons has been dudded through this process?
Look, I wouldn't make that case. I mean, the government of the day is allowed and, in fact, responsible for making the best decisions in terms of emergency management and budget allocation. If they don't believe Resilience New South Wales is working the way it had intended, they should make changes. I mean, particularly during natural disasters, by definition, the stakes are very high. What I do think is that it's been 4 days since media speculation in relation to Mr Fitzsimmons' position and the agency's future in general, and we really need a decision from the New South Wales Premier here. There's a lot of people that are waiting to find out whether their jobs will still be there. And secondly, we need these agencies to prepare for the changes, whether it's more funding for the SES, changes to protocols and procedures for New South Wales Police. Let's get on with the changes so that we can prepare for the bushfire season coming up at Christmas, and unfortunately, according to the Bureau of Meteorology, a wet spring, which no doubt will affect flood-affected communities.
The initial estimates of the cost around the Northern Rivers recovery is to the tune of $3 billion. If you win the election in March, would you seek additional funding support from the Albanese government?
Well, the New South Wales government's obviously made some announcements in relation to buybacks and resilient communities, and we welcome that. I think that that's been well handled by the New South Wales Premier in the last 24 hours. What we're a little concerned about is that it's unclear where the funding will come from. So I understand when you've got a major natural disaster, the Commonwealth's got deeper pockets. They should partner with the state government in order to make sure that those funds flow and communities can rebuild. What I'd encourage Mr Perrottet to do is sit down with Mr Albanese, see if we can get those funds in place to help a town like Lismore, because the longer you wait from the period of the natural disaster to today, for example, the more people leave town and don't return. If a business packs up and leaves, Kieran, they're unlikely to return if they don't receive help and support from the Commonwealth and state government.
New South Wales Opposition Leader Chris Minns, appreciate your time this Sunday morning. Thanks.
Thanks, Kieran.